Welcome to a new podcast from the New Silk Roads project. In this podcast, Professor Valerie Hansen will discuss the role of silk in the economy of the Silk Road. Professor Valerie Hansen is professor of history and teaches Chinese and world history at Yale. She has written many books and articles on topics regarding the Silk Road, including The Silk Road: A New History, The Year 1000, and Voyages in World History. If you're interested in hearing more podcasts from us, check out our website. There you can also find an online library dedicated to the New Silk Road. And to join the discussion, check out our Facebook or Twitter.
Hello, my name is Valerie Hansen, and today I'm going to be talking about the place of silk in the economy of the Silk Road. When we say Silk Road, we're implying that silk is the main commodity that was bought and sold along the Silk Road. And today I'm going to explain to you why that use of the term does not capture the role of silk on the Silk Road. Silk was a commodity. It was traded. A lot of other things were traded too. But the main function of silk was as money, as a form of currency. The region I'm going to be talking about is the area between the modern capital, the modern Chinese city of Xi'an, which was the capital of the Tang Dynasty between 618 and 907, and then going the routes across through the overland trade routes through Central Asia, went around the Taklamakan Desert and ended in Samarkand. These were the main routes between the Tang Dynasty capital and Samarkand. The Silk Road connected Samarkand with the Tang capital of Chang'an. And for me to talk about this in about 10 minutes, I'm going to be focusing on 3 documents. One of them is a list of goods that were transported on the Silk Road a list of goods that were transported on the Silk Road in 2-week intervals around the year 600. We're not certain of the actual date of that document. The second document is about a dispute between 2 Silk Road merchants dating to 670. And the final document concerns a shipment of silk to a garrison in northwest China, and that dates from 745. So let's start with the first document, the one from 600. It lists all the goods that Sogdian merchants, those are merchants who came from the region of Samarkand, carried into China, into the oasis, the Silk Road oasis of Turfan, around 600. This is an interesting document because it tells us how much tax they paid, and they paid a tax based on the weight of the goods that they were transporting. So we get a sense of there are small quantities and there are some very large quantities. Well, very large quantities being, say, a couple of 100 kilos, nothing larger than that. So that means that a few pack animals would have been able to carry these goods. And we find out from this list, silk is not on the list. Silk was probably not taxed in this way by weight. So we can assume some silk is traveling on this route, but we also see the other things that are traveling: gold, silver, ammonium chloride, which is a good that is not familiar to many of us, and that was used as a flux for metal. It could lower the melting temperature of certain metals. It was also used as a softener for leather. There's some spices. There's a generic word in Chinese, xiang, which just means fragrance, and it can be blocks of wood. It can be incense. It can be spices. The document mentions turmeric. It mentions sugar. Those are things that would fall under this category of fragrances of xiang. So those we learn from that document that their quantities being traded aren't that large, that many things are being traded besides silk. And we also see the importance of the Sogdians because there are 49 merchants' names that appear on this document, and 41 of the 49 have Sogdian names. So that tells us a lot of things that are important about the Silk Road. The second document is about a trade dispute, not a legal dispute, not a trade dispute, a legal dispute between Chinese merchant and his Sogdian partner's younger brother. The reason the younger brother is suing in court, this is also in Turfan, is because his older brother has died, and he claims that the Chinese merchant borrowed 275 bolts of silk from his brother. And then the brother was killed somehow, we don't know how, and the younger brother is asking the Chinese merchant to pay him compensation. A bolt of silk, it's hard for us to think about silk, I think to imagine silk as a form of money. I mean, the world we live in now, we have coins, we have bills, we have, of course, credit cards. In the medieval Chinese world, there were no credit cards, of course. The Chinese have not yet invented paper money. That comes around 1000. So in an ideal world, they would have used only coins. The problem was they didn't have enough metal to have a monetary system with only coins. And so they had to devise alternate currencies. And they ended up using silk and grain. Grain they put in containers with a fixed measurement. So the silk, they measured in bolts, a bolt of silk. And we have one picture. This is from around the 3rd or 4th centuries. This is from Central Asia. This was recovered archaeologically. It's a picture from the British Museum, and the photographer photographed it as if it was 2 separate pieces of silk, but the 2 pieces of silk should be together. And the width of a bolt of silk was just a little over half a meter. So actually, the standard width, according to the Tang law, was 56 centimeters. The length was much longer, was 12 meters. And that turns out to be enough to make 2 sets of clothes, 2 sets of trousers, and 2 jackets for a man. And that standard amount of silk was in use between about 200 and 1,000 at that standard measure of silk. When we think of this, we may think, well, silk was so cumbersome. Why would you do that? But as I told you, there was a coin shortage, and silk was lighter than iron coins. If the Chinese coins were made mostly out of bronze, so a mix of copper and tin and lead. And silk had other advantages. People could make silk. They could produce, peasants could raise silkworms at home and spin their own silk thread and then weave the silk. You could also make things from silk. If you were traveling with a bolt of silk and you suddenly got cold, you could make clothing from it or wrap it around you. And silk turns out to be pretty durable. It wasn't damaged. It held its value over fairly long periods of time. Oh, and in that dispute, we've got the Sogdian who is saying that his brother lent 275 bolts of silk. So that's silk as money. And then the 2 partners, the deceased Sogdian and the living Chinese, had 7 animals, 2 camels, 4 cattle, and 1 donkey. And then they were trading, not the silk. The silk was currency. They could use that to buy things. They were carrying bows and arrows, bowls, and saddles. So that's the same impression we get of the Silk Road trade from that document from 600, that a small number of pack animals could carry the goods that merchants were carrying. And we call them merchants. It might be more accurate to say peddlers. These are people who are peddling goods, probably not over too great distances. They're carrying them from one town to the next. They sell some things, they pick up some things, and they keep going. The final document is a tax document from the Tang army, the Tang Dynasty army, which sends 2 shipments each of 7,000 bolts of silk to a garrison. The shipment goes from the capital up to northwest China. And those are interesting documents because they show us, we get a snapshot that this was not 7,000 bolts of all white play and weave silk, as we might imagine. It wasn't a standard currency. People living in different localities could submit any silk that they wove, so there's a lot of variation and a lot of variety of the kinds of silk. And that's explained, the document breaks down the 7,000 bolts so that the receiving, when the silk arrives in the garrison, they'll know what kind of silk they've been given. And then their task as the military authorities is to convert that silk into coins. They don't have the coins. It's a mathematical conversion. And then from the coins, they can convert it into grain, because grain is what they use. They use grain to pay the soldiers, and they also used grain in the market. They converted the silk into coins. This is just a pen and paper transaction, or brush and pen, we could say a brush and paper transaction, and then they convert again from coins into grain, and the grain is what they're going to use to pay the soldiers, and they're also going to use grain to buy supplies for the soldiers in the market. So that final document, the third document, gives us some very important information, which is that the government is spending much more silk and using it in larger transactions than the merchants who are involved in either the trade dispute or the merchants who are carrying goods across that taxation point. Now, you might think, if this is the case, why do we call it the Silk Road? Why didn't people figure this out? Well, the documents I've been telling you about all were excavated in the second half of the 20th century, so after 1949, after the founding of the People's Republic. And the person who gave us the name the Silk Road was Baron von Richthofen, and he coined the term in 1877. And he was flying by the seat of his pants. He had a good classical education. He knew that Pliny the Elder complained about imports of silk and into Rome, and he thought, well, that must be the nature of the Silk Road trade. The Chinese are exporting silk, and the Romans are exporting coins. Today, we know that's not true. We know that other countries besides China were exporting silk, like Byzantium, and it's much closer to Rome. And we also know that the earliest Roman coin found in China dates to the 530s. So that's long after the period that Pliny is talking about, and long after the fall of the Han Dynasty. So this idea of the Silk Road trade being between the Han Dynasty in China and the Roman Empire is not an accurate picture. The Silk Road trade gets going after the Han Dynasty, and it really peaks during the Tang Dynasty. So I hope that I've persuaded you that silk was traded throughout Central Asia, across the overland trade routes, but that its main function in this period in the Tang Dynasty was as a currency and not as a commodity. Thank you.